13th Board of Adjustment meeting to order. Before we begin our business today, I would like to acknowledge our colleague Mark Stonecipher, who was elected Tuesday as new Ward 2 councilman, and congratulate him on his election and his continued service to our city as a city councilman. It's been a pleasure to serve with you. Our first order of business is to receive the minutes of the February 19th, 2015 meeting. I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to receive the minutes. The minutes are approved. Request by staff for withdrawals or...
We have three today. Item number 2, case number 14007 is requesting a continuance to April 16th. Item number 10, case number 14014 is requesting a continuance to March 19th. And case number 11, item number 11, case number 14015 is asking to be withdrawn.
May I have a separate motion for each of those requests?
I'll make a motion to continue case number 14007 to April 16th.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Register your vote. They are continued.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Register your vote. They are continued. Yes.
I'd make a motion to accept the withdrawal in case number 14015.
A motion and a second. They are approved. Any continuous requests or withdrawals from the public? Hearing none, we'll proceed with our first case.
Item number 1, case number 14017, request for use variance of GLB Exploration, Inc. for permit to drill an oil gas well located at 10816 Robinson at Robinson Lane.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Wayne Smith, 7011 North Robinson, here on behalf of the applicant GLB Exploration, Inc. Be happy to answer any questions you might have on this. It is a typical drilling application for the city of Oklahoma City. This site is in the southeast part of the city in a more agricultural rural area.
Are you aware of any opposition?
There are two requests to speak about this application. If there's no other discussion right now from board members, I'll excuse you.
Okay.
And invite C.E. Maxwell to speak. If you would, just approach the microphone and give us your name and address for the record, please.
Clarence Maxwell, 11700 Southeast 104th, Oklahoma City.
Go ahead and tell us.
Pardon me?
Go ahead and speak to the application.
I have a water well within 145 yards of where they want to drill their well. Now, we realize they will drill the well. We're asking if they could move to the southwest corner of the 2.5 acres. That would put it away from all the property owners as much as possible. And there's room there to do that. It's 50 yards from my property line and 143 total to my water well. Now, and also the road, they're going to build a road coming off of Robeson into it. We asked if they would move that road, not behind Mr. Davis's property, further to the south, away from his property line as much as possible. And also, they're going to have to build a road in there down to Robeson. Who's going to maintain that, and what quality of road will it be? And I think that's what I have.
Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. Wayne, would you care to respond?
The site of this well is chosen from a geological standpoint, plus negotiated positioning with the surface owner. It would be very difficult to change that. As to the road, Robeson Road is currently a private road. In the 1970s, the developer that platted that road did file with Cleveland County paperwork to dedicate that to public use. From the record that we've been able to locate in discussion with Cleveland County and the City of Oklahoma City, it was never accepted as a public road by either governmental agency. So it's currently still a private road. And there are essentially 3 property owners that own property along that road, and the plan for that is to improve the road to an all-weather access, which is required by the oil and gas ordinance of Oklahoma City. And so the final road would just be a gravel road, but currently it's almost impassable. And I would hate to have to drive that road myself.
And the water well issue for him, the proximity?
The distance away from his water well is sufficiently far to meet all of the statutory requirements. And then as part of the well construction, as an operator, we are required to set what's called a surface casing. It's a large diameter steel pipe that will extend deep enough to go below any water that is what's called treatable, or it could be used for drinking purposes. The state of Oklahoma requires that you go 50 feet below that depth, and the city ordinances are an additional 150, or a total of 200 feet below that treatable water depth. That surface casing is witnessed by the city inspector as far as its construction, installation, and testing. That is the primary defense for freshwater protection. And then, of course, a producing well has an additional 2 concentric strings of steel pipe to contain any of the production.
How deep is the surface casing on this well?
This one is lost my sheet of paper. This one will be 1,330 feet from surface.
This time, let me excuse Wayne again. We have one more gentleman that would like to speak on this. Mr. Davis, if you would just give us your name and address for the record.
My name is Tom Davis. I live at 11624 Southeast 104th. Basically, I own the land to the north of the property that they're going to drill on. My concerns are that, me and my neighbors all have houses right there. They're going to come in and clear an area, obviously, of trees. My concerns are I'm going to look out my back window and see 2 big tanks and an oil well as well. They're going to put a road across the backside of Roy Vineyard's land into the oil well. I'm asking that they go on further up Robeson Road and come directly across. That way I don't have a road down one side of my property and one down the back. We moved out to the country to live in the country and feel like we're getting surrounded a little bit.
And I'll tell you, they have a right to pursue their business interests, and as a homeowner, you have your rights too. What's happening in some parts of the city is these were areas that were undeveloped for years and years and years, and drilling activity has been common there. And as residential developments begin to encroach, then these issues became more apparent for you. And so we have to remember that as a homeowner, you have your rights, but they also have their rights to pursue their business interests. One of their requirements is going to be to do some screening and some landscaping out of consideration for those of you that live close by. So I appreciate your comments. Let's give Wayne a chance to respond to.
Can I say one more thing, sir?
Certainly.
Also, basically they agreed on this site because of the geology and because of the landowner's request for it to be there. They thought about putting it in other places, but the landowner didn't want them to do that there. So it is possible to put it somewhere else, further south, to where it doesn't affect, all these neighbors who have been there for years versus one landowner who's got plenty of land out there.
Is moving it that little bit south going to make that much difference?
I think so. It'll put distance between the wells, and it'll put more trees in between us and them, away from our kids and whatnot.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right.
The access road to this site will be some distance south of the property line of Mr. Davis's property. There will remain a row of current trees between his property and the well location, so that there's additional screening achieved by that row of trees. The movement of the site in the early negotiations for this approval from the landowner, there was another site that was considered. It was not acceptable by the surface owner, so therefore the site that is chosen was one that was agreed upon that would meet not only the geological needs for the exploration, but also the demands of the surface property owner.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, the location is based on geology, and you entered into an agreement with the surface owner, and the surface owner has been paid surface damages, correct?
That's correct.
And you're in compliance with the Corporation Commission rules and regulations?
That's correct.
And you have 1,330 feet of surface pipe to protect the wells nearby?
That's correct.
I'd make a motion to approve the variance.
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Register your vote. You are approved.
Thank you.
Item number 3, case number 14016, request of Reynolds Ford for a variance to permit exposed exterior metal located at 7320 Northwest Expressway.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Marley. I'm with Aztec Building Systems, 3361 Deskin Drive in Norman, and I'm representing Reynolds Ford. We're requesting the use of architectural metals as a part of Ford's branding program for all the dealers. You've probably seen several dealers in Oklahoma City that have used the same metals at different locations, and I did bring a rendering, which I believe you may have already seen. Sure. We are in C3, surrounded by I-2. We do have one dealership next door, which is in C3 as well. And welcome any questions you might have.
I think the intent of the statute was to prevent, just a straight commercial or metal siding in these areas. And I think, the fact that this is an architectural metal and is an industry standard in this type of construction should be considered.
Is there anyone signed up to speak in protest on this?
No.
Are you aware of anybody in opposition?
No, I'm not.
That being said, this is part of a nationwide schematic by Ford, and I know they do it on their Lincoln stores as well. I'd make a motion to approve.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Register your vote. You are approved.
Thank you very much.
Item number 4, case number 14018, request of D.W. Converse for a variance to the 5-acre minimum lot size located at 12600 Southwest 89th Street.
Sir, your name and address for the record.
My name is D.W. Converse, address 3701 Lone Tree, Edmond, Oklahoma. I'm representing the client. This is a partition to let the family put another resident on there to take care of an elderly parent. I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
My one question is, we see a lot, and there was one of the comments staff brought up, that we approve a lot of medical hardship permits where there's a temporary dwelling on the property for a period of 0 to 3 years. Why are you taking this route and wanting a more permanent structure? Is it because, I mean, I don't know the situation, facts and circumstances.
They didn't want to, make a long story short, they didn't want to divulge the hardship right now, but we may talk about that in a minute. To get financing to put another temporary, or put financing to get a structure in there, they don't want to do a temporary, so just something nice. These people currently live in Mustang. They want to move in and renovate the existing home, put another home next to it, so families will both have the son and the father will have both have their own residence. That's what's going on. They can't get the financing without having a different deed. The bank won't allow them to do that.
Thank you.
We have a protest letter from Robert and Dana Crum. Are they in attendance today? Their position is that, you know, they bought in this area to enjoy the lifestyle associated with their 5-acre lot, and they are opposed to your request.
I'm aware of that. I'm aware that there's, across the street, there's denser housing, smaller houses, more houses. These people live to the west. I think, I'm going to second guess, if I may. I know I'm assuming, which is not a good thing to do, but this house is going to be a modest home, 2,000 square feet. It's nestled in a wooded site. There are existing trees there now that are on the west side. The reason it's partitioned the way it's partitioned is to be nestled in those trees. It will not be seen from the neighbors. Unless you know it's there, I think they're not going to see the house. It's going to use the existing drive, no new access coming off the existing access off of 89th Street. It's going to sit in the house. It's going to be screened from the neighbor who's protesting by the trees that are there existing and probably some additional landscaping. So I think that, you know, I know it's an agricultural setting, but it's really not. There's not much agriculture going on there. It's just the big lots with some small houses. This will probably be an updated house, but it's still not going to be a huge house. It's not going to be overbearing and going to be, you know, a skyscraper. It's just going to be a modest home so they can take care of their father, who's senior in years.
Based on the topography, there's going to be no additional access, no additional drive, and it's going to be screened from the Southwest 89th Street and Sharon Lane?
Yes, Chairman. Board member.
I'm sympathetic with your appeal, but if I had bought, under the pretense that these were going to be 5-acre lots, I mean, I would want that protected. I mean, part of what they bought is they bought a home, but they also bought a lifestyle, or a perceived lifestyle. And to begin to see variance requests, to diminish, and pretty soon everything that you bought or thought you bought, it begins to disappear around you. So and it's like Nick said, you have the ability to put a temporary structure there to deal with the hardship and stay in compliance.
Well, a mobile home, I mean, I think you say temporary structure, I mean a mobile home. That's not really, I mean, given this is Oklahoma and Tornado Alley, mobile homes are not what we
It is the common solution in this application where you've got a family member that is, needs some additional care or needs family close by.
Yes.
And in a structure, in a tornado situation is not that much more secure. I mean, you need to head to a shelter anyway.
We also seem to see a lot of these too, at least it seems like lately we've seen one at least every meeting, and people keep coming up with different reasons for them. Part of the reason for the zoning, Janice, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but we're putting a strain on things. They're designed to not have city services. They have wells, all these kinds of things. So there's an infrastructure problem, too, as these densities continue to increase. I'm sure he could satisfy that, but it seems to be something that we're facing more and more. What other considerations, JJ, does the city have for when they look at AA? I mean, clearly you could always rezone the lot, right, if there's legitimate interest for changing from AA, but what other things about AA make that challenging for adding structures?
I think just what you said, the increased density and the strain. Right. The good thing is they're going to share access, but the code, there's a provision in the code for these types of situations.
And that's the temporary housing.
Temporary, that we know at some point in the future that the lot will comply with the ordinance again.
But it won't. The financial aspect of that has to be a separate deed. That all has to happen on a different parcel. The finances was kind of generating the thing right now. You can't finance something for something else unless you do the whole thing, and that's not the situation. I mean, there's two different families. So there's a dad and a son, and they're not wanting to commingle. So that's kind of what's happening here. It's a well and septic out there. There isn't any infrastructure from the city side of it. It's just well and septic. They will do that. And we went oversized on the lot. We didn't do a minimum lot. We could have, I could have gerrymandered this and split it and had it been almost a 4-acre sized lot with that 7.5 acres. It's a small agricultural tract. I understand the neighbor's concern. I don't think he wants to see a bunch of houses, and I think I've addressed that by saying, okay, we're going to screen it with the existing trees that are there. And they're mature trees. They're large trees. It's not small trees. They're large trees. And with the cedars that are there, this house will be nestled in, and it shouldn't be an eyesore. It shouldn't present a problem with their...
I don't think the concern necessarily that I have and with my board members have, and I don't want to speak for anybody else, is not the aesthetics or the access, or it's the fact that there's another avenue to do this and the procedural posture behind that. I don't think that you've come before us in anything that's not in good faith. I just don't know if we opened the door here for this type of procedure when it closes. And you buy into these areas with this type of lot requirement, knowing what you're getting into, and I think that there is another avenue for you to proceed, which keeps it temporary in nature, and I think that's where my concern lies. So I think that what you're trying to do is very well planned and designed. I'm just not sure it quite fits where we're the integrity of the AA district.
Understood and heard. Let me ask for a continuance, and let me go back and talk to my client. They're not here today. Let me go back and talk to them and see if they're willing to investigate that further, if you will. Board members?
I would entertain that motion.
And maybe they can talk to the
neighbors and come to some consensus.
If we can get him to understand where we're coming from, and if he will withdraw his protest, then we can proceed from there.
Next meeting is March the 19th. Meeting after that is April the 2nd.
Let's go for the 2nd.
And April the 16th is available, too, if you want to move it out and give yourself plenty of time.
Okay, let's see if we can't make the 2nd. If I have a problem, I'll ask the clerk to revise that date for me, if you don't mind.
I'll make a motion to continue it to the 2nd.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Register your vote. You are continued to April the 2nd.
Thank you, board members. Appreciate it very much. Good luck, Mark, on your councilman-elect.
Item number 5, case number 14019, request of NWX Retail LLC for a variance to the landscaping requirements of the sign regulations located at 6801 Northwest Expressway.
Welcome. Just give us your name and address for the record, please.
I'm Jeff Irvin. The address of the property we own here in Oklahoma City, 6801 Northwest Expressway in Oklahoma City.
Go ahead and speak to your application.
Yeah, we're asking for a variance for the 100 points of landscape directly around the base of our sign. The reason is that in order to, as my engineer drew it, it would encompass 2 parking spaces at the base, which we would lose 2 parking spaces right in front of our property. We're more than happy to distribute the 100 points of landscaping throughout the site if that makes everyone or satisfies the board as is required. But if that's my request, just to be able to disperse the landscaping within the site.
The staff report indicates that there appears to be an area in front of the sign to add landscaping.
Yeah, and I read that, and that's what, there is a utility line, a sewer line that runs in front of the site, but we can still, I'm not sure we can get the entire amount of landscaping between the outside of the parking spaces and the utility, the 10-foot setback that the utility requires, but we can certainly, we can put it somewhere within that area.
Discussion.
So would the solution then be to vary not the requirement for the landscaping, but simply the requirement that the landscaping be within 10 feet And if so, how many feet do we need to give you?
I'm not sure.
It appears that he's telling me he's not sure whether you could totally comply with the landscaping requirement within 10 feet. What he's asking for is relief from having to put the landscaping at the pylon with the resulting loss of 2 parking spaces. He simply wants to comply with the landscaping requirement and have the discretion, I think, to disperse that landscaping on your property.
That's very well said. Yeah, that's exactly.
And I'm looking at an aerial of the site. I'm sympathetic to why you're having to come and get the variance, but I think Janice's point is well taken in that blanketly to give just, however much distance you need is entirely different from saying, look, the intent of the ordinance was to keep it within a certain distance from the sign. How closely can you come to complying with that? I think, is there anyone here to speak in protest of this application or to speak against it?
Not that I'm aware of.
Are you aware of any opposition to the application?
I hadn't heard.
So I think our concern is just making sure that the integrity of the ordinance is maintained to the best of your ability rather than winding up with, 4 trees in the back corner of the parking lot.
And we do have a plan that it shows we can, I don't know if you want it dispersed right by the sign. I don't know if the intent is to landscape the base of the sign, if that's what we're trying to accomplish, but we can certainly disperse it across the front of the property and easily meet the amount of landscaping. But if you want it directly...
Is that a survey site plan right there? What's your distance of frontage there?
365 feet approximately, I believe.
What about that would be to the east of your ingress and egress where the sign is located?
Oh, gosh. I'm sorry, it's 314, it's probably 260 feet maybe from here to here. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I'm just trying. So you got 260 feet. You think you can keep it within 100 feet of the base of the sign?
Easily.
I make a motion to grant the variance conditioned upon applicant's ability to keep the landscaping requirement of 100 feet of the sign.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Register your vote. You are approved.
Okay, thank you very much. Hey, before I leave, can I tell y'all how wonderful a job Kathy Kasula does, by the way?
That goes without saying.
That is true.
Item number 6, case number 14020, request of Marty Summers for a variance to the side yard setback located at 7425 Southwest 112th Street.
Name and address for the record, please.
Thank you. Marty Summers, reside at 7425 Southwest 112th Street in Oklahoma City. I'm requesting a variance to PUD 978. Specifically, what I'm requesting is that we have a 15-foot setback, and we're wanting to have an addition of a garage, a safe room, and a family room. And we were asking for 5 feet of variance. We do have a 10-foot utility easement. We are not asking to, or we will not encroach on that 10-foot utility easement, just the 5 foot from the PUD. I have spoken with my neighbors, the neighboring, Bobby Waldy lives to the north of me. It will be between Bobby's house and mine. He's in favor. I did attach a letter to the request, and also I have approval from my HOA, my homeowners association, in approval. So are there any questions?
I have a question of staff. Judge, I see that this PUD 978 would have been a while ago, so do we have any way of knowing whether the issue of the side yard was something that was, deliberately negotiated, or?
For the best I can tell, it was just a preference of the developer at that time.
It seems to me that the people who are sort of most directly affected, his neighbor and the homeowners association, have agreed to it. The side yard setback on an R1 would normally be 5 feet, and so it's not encroaching in any way on, our requirements. So I think all things considered, I would move for approval.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Register your vote. You are approved.
Thank you very much.
Item number 7, case number 14021, request of Bob Labar for a variance to allow a sign located within the public right-of-way located at 2525 Northwest Expressway.
Good afternoon. If you'd give us your name and address for the record.
Matt Hinkle, 12708 Stickney Place, Oklahoma City. I'd like to second the Kathy Kasula comment. I am representing Hardworking Realty and Bob LaBar, Tyler Sign Company. Unusual situation when the Northwest Expressway was built. The south edge of the building in question became the property line, and with no allowance for any signage. I have a rendering here. This is the sign that's existing, and it is existing in the right-of-way, exactly where we would like to place this sign. We have gotten letters back from everybody involved in the revocable department saying that as long as we stay out of the site triangles and stay off of the easements, they're okay with us putting it there. Their neighbor, the Oil Center, has basically the same size sign at their property. As you can see here, the blue square, the south edge of the building is the property line, and the sign sets out here a lot closer to Northwest Expressway, just trying to drive some revenue and let people know who actually is tenants in the Expressway Tower with the new ownership. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So with the new proposed signage, you would have a list of tenants below that?
Sure. We have space for 4 tenants on that sign, yes, sir.
So you'd have your 4 anchors there. Staff makes a comment that you need to demonstrate that, and I can tell by the map, I don't think it's a site obstruction.
No, we're nowhere close to.
If I remember right, between the Belle Isle Library, there's just a little side access road.
Right, there is a side access road right here that pulls in front of the buildings that is not Northwest Expressway, and so you have an entrance here, an entrance here, and an entrance here, and our sign is right here in the middle of this.
Okay, so if you're on that access road in a compact vehicle, you'll still be able to see.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Either direction on Northwest Highway?
Absolutely.
And the new sign is just going where the existing sign is. It's the fact that you're changing it out, which is what required you to file. Yeah,
Correct.
okay.
And it's a little larger.
How much larger is the new sign than the old sign?
The old sign was 6 foot tall and 8 foot wide, and the new sign falls underneath the C3 requirements, all except for the fact that it sits in the right-of-way. The building is zone C3, and the new sign is 18.6 by 8 foot tall.
Before we take action or consider action on this, we've got a protest letter, and I would like to ask, is there anybody here that wishes to speak about this application or is here in protest of this application?
I did read the protest letter, and I think the people who wrote it misunderstood. They said that the existing signage was substandard, and it's going away. So their complaint about it being substandard is actually why we're getting rid of it and would like to put up something new and pretty.
You're giving them an upgrade.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion to. I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Register your vote. You are approved.
Thank you all very much.
Item number 8, case number 14022, request of Bill Bleakley and Linda Mioli for a variance to the minimum height requirement and fencing requirements in the DTD1 Downtown Transitional District located at 607 Northwest 7th Street.
Welcome. Please give us your name and address for the record, please.
I am Linda Mioli. This is my husband, Bill Bleakley. We live at 3200 Harvey Parkway in Oklahoma City. We are planning to build, hopefully, our last home at 607 Northwest 7th Street. We want it to be a home that we can age in gracefully and for it to be as sustainable as possible. We are asking for a variance from the 2-story to a 1-story home, which seems to have been permitted up until a year or two ago, and something happened in the regulations that changed that. And we are also asking for a variance for our fence to be made out of an architectural metal, which is the most sustainable material that we have found.
The case they reference, I recall that, and I think at the time, JJ, you addressed it, but could you tell us again why there was the change in 2014?
I really can't speak to the reason behind the change. I know it was a deliberate change, but I don't know what the reason was for that. Prior to that change, this would have been permitted.
And I would note that in our packet, January 28th, Urban Design Committee did recommend approval of the variances for this applicant.
And I guess that's why I'm confused, is this is the second one of these we've seen in a relatively short period of time on the same issue, and it only became an issue last year, but then we're getting a recommendation for approval, so I'm trying to figure out why there was a change that is required this to begin with.
Well, I think who knows what the reason for the change was. I don't think we can figure that out today, but I think probably the reason for the recommendation is there are already 3 existing structures. We've approved a 4th, now a 5th. In fact, if they were to be held to the standard of 2 stories, not only would it inconvenience them, but I think it would make the block, odd. So I think perhaps it is all for the best that these things come to us one by one. There's a reason that they're going for a higher density in this area and not looking to have single-story, single-family homes built along there. But in this particular case and on this particular block, this seems to me to make perfect sense.
I agree with that, and I think that, just to amplify that, Janice, is the overall theme is to have multi-story as a long-term strategic initiative, but on a street where this scenario exists, it would be incongruent with the overall design scheme. That's exactly what a variance is appropriate for. So I
also think that this kind of innovative development, infill development and redevelopment, is very much something that the city is interested in promoting and encouraging. So I don't think that approval of the request here in any way damages the city's interests. Is there somebody else who had asked to speak on this matter?
I have no speakers registered on this case. Anybody in attendance that wishes to speak on this variance request?
Well, I'll move approval.
I'd make a second that.
I have a motion and a second. Register your vote. You are approved.
Thank you very much.
Item number 9, case number 14023, appeal of Ed Shadid of the decision of the Downtown Design Review Committee regarding the approval of the demolition of the Union Bus Station located at 427 West Sheridan Avenue.
Good afternoon. My name is Travis Lawler. I'm attorney at Lehman, Mott, Cunningham, and Davis with an address of 5613 North Classen Boulevard in Oklahoma City, 73118. I'm here today on behalf of Dr. Ed Shadid in appealing the decision by the Downtown Design Review Committee for demolition of the Union Bus Station. I just wanted to point out the basis for the appeal, and then I'm going to invite Dr. Shadid to come address the board as well. I want to make it clear that, we want to make it clear that this appeal is not intended to stand in the way of progress. We want to partner with progress in Oklahoma City. We are not attempting to block the development as it's proposed, but we are simply urging that the process for development of downtown Oklahoma City is best obtained when the guidelines that were put in place for redevelopment of the downtown area are followed and not rushed through. I'd like to point out the specific guidelines that this appeal states were not followed. You can follow along in Exhibit A of our appeal, which is in the materials for today's agenda. Specifically, the Oklahoma City Municipal Code in Chapter 59, Section 59-7200.1 are the development guidelines for the downtown business district, and they state that the Downtown Design Review Committee and staff shall apply these guidelines as appropriate to the specific site, preserving the character and context of the urban environment, and in taking in context existing buildings and historical resources, that they should be rehabilitated so that as much of the original fabric as possible remains intact. I'd like to point out the shall in those guidelines. They appear to be mandatory by their plain reading definition. In section 59-7200.2A, it says the purpose and intents of the guidelines are to ensure that uses are compatible with, amongst other things, historical and significance of downtown area, and to preserve and restore historical features. This appeal is grounded in that law, in that when you follow the guidelines through, they clearly mandate a preservation of the historical aspects of Oklahoma City. They contemplate, for example, demolition of a historical building like this to the Historical Preservation Commission. In this case, that was not done. There's been no input from the Historical Preservation Commission, despite the guidelines contemplating that for a historical building. You know, the DDRC decision was made after a review of a staff report. As I'm sure you're all aware, and the appeal lays out, the staff report actually recommended that the Union Bus Station not be demolished. It recommended demolition of all the remainder of the buildings, but it pointed out the historical significance specifically of the Union Bus Station. They quoted, for example, a downtown intensive level survey that was done in 2013. And that survey points out that the area in question here is right at the core of the original settlement of Oklahoma City. And by that, the core as a group would be eligible on the historic register, and that specifically certain buildings have historical significance, like the Union Bus Station. The DDRE staff report quotes the intensive level survey as saying, this rare intact grouping includes the Union Bus Station, a one-of-a-kind structure in Oklahoma City on the same level of distinctiveness and popularity as other local landmarks such as the Milk Bottle Building or the Gold Dome Building. They go on to say the loss of elements that historically define the core of the community significantly impacts the city's identity, its unique attributes that distinguishes it from other communities in the region. And the DDRC staff report, which was not followed by the DDRC, whose recommendations were not followed by the DDRC when they made their decision to raise all of the buildings, including the Union Bus Station, stated that a particular preservation opportunity may exist within this specific project without significantly compromising the goals of the new development. They go on to say, while the glass enclosure that is proposed in this corner where the Union Bus Station stands now does provide greater design interest on the corner, it does not relay the historical significance of the existing Union Bus Station. Staff suggests that the exterior facade of the Union Bus Station could be retained, refurbished, and integrated into the new development, accommodating both desired leasable space and the distinctive architectural character. The intensive level survey of downtown done in 2013 goes on to say that to reference these specific guidelines that we're arguing in this appeal were not followed. The intent of the design ordinance is to retain these character-defining structures both as a mean to distinguish the city's streetscape, but also as a way to honor the legacy of the city's development. The collection of existing buildings within the block in question reveals that Oklahoma City is not just a city that redeveloped in the past 5 years, nor is it a product of urban renewal in the 1960s or even the 1970s, but that it has regenerated itself many times since its founding over 125 years ago. These buildings are proof that downtown Oklahoma City has survived and thrived and evolved through boom and bust. I'd like to point out, too, that this appeal, grounded in the idea that these guidelines were not followed, also simply request that the board understand that not all of the information that could be available to make the best decision in this case has been presented. Specifically, I mentioned the Historical Preservation Commission was not involved, despite the regulations contemplating their involvement when a historical property is on proposal to be raised. And here, I don't think that there's much argument that there is a historical benefit to this property. In addition, and I'm going to have Dr. Shadid discuss this more, but a lot of the, if not all, of the major redevelopment projects in downtown Oklahoma City have been moved forward in cooperation with the city, specifically the Economic Redevelopment Team, which is in charge of distributing the TIF funds that the city has on hand to help economic development both have increased economic feasibility for developers in the downtown area and increased historical viability. Here, we have a proposal to build a large new complex in a building, but one specific area of that proposal was recommended to be denied by the DDRC's staff report. And by ignoring that, and by doing that without submitting this to Historical Preservation Commission and without addressing the idea that TIF funds could be used to make redevelopment of the Union Bus Station or even the whole entire project and certain other aspects more economically viable, we believe that's not proper under the guidelines. The guidelines contemplate a process for historical buildings renovation that is methodical, it's well thought out, and it ends up with all of the information before the board before they make a decision. I'd like to just leave you with a thought. If you're a hardworking middle-class American and you come across a lot of money, maybe you win the lottery, who knows? It would be very easy to go buy a new garage and fill it up with new cars and just get rid of all the old cars you had. However, here, you may endanger, if you do that, having something missing when you get rid of that old car by calling the tow truck to come take it away without looking at it and making sure if there are any parts of that car that are, that are viable and useful, or can the car be preserved as a whole. This appeal simply proposes that the decision of the Downtown Design Review Committee to ignore the staff recommendations and to raise all 9 of the buildings in question, including the Union Bus Station, be overturned only as to the Union Bus Station building and only temporarily. This is not meant to serve as a long-term roadblock to limit development. We understand that you have to ride a development wave while it's there, and we want to partner with this development. We're only asking that the decision to raise the Union Bus Station be delayed and put on another agenda down the road for reconsideration after review of Historical Preservation Commission recommendations, a review of the economic feasibility, including TIF funds from the economic development team, review of a traffic survey which has been undertaken but not reviewed before this decision was made. The preliminary indications we believe from the traffic study indicate that in the southwest corner where this parking garage is going to be of this development, where the Union Bus Station sits, that if a parking garage is put there as it's proposed in this development, that it will cause a traffic problem on Walker Avenue. We think that should be considered as well. And we would also, of course, welcome revised proposals by the developers to either A, promote a development that keeps the Union Bus Station and the entire building existing as it is for redevelopment by for some business purpose, or B, to incorporate more of the Union Bus Station into the design as contemplated by the regulations than what is currently being proposed by the developers. The developer's current proposal only includes preservation of the sign itself and some blue tiles. I will be happy to answer questions, but I will leave the rest of my comments to Dr. Shadid.
At this point, thank you. Dr. Shadid.
Thank you. Ed Shadid, 5900 Mosteller Drive. I think one of the first things I'm going to propose the council take a look at is putting cushions on these benches. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I want to just touch on maybe 3 points to augment what was said already. And that's, number one, just a focus on the precedence of how much time we're allotting to these important historic decisions. And I would argue that it's much too fast. The process is moving much too fast. When you saw the DDRC, or when we had the DDRC review of this item, which lasted about several hours, you had about 2.5 hours of testimony and witnesses in support of the applicant. You had about 5 minutes. On the other side, my legal counsel and I will basically double the public comments in opposition to this move with today's comments. There was no discussion with the council, who's charged with making policy recommendations as to their thoughts as to the demolition of a super block, which our city staff indicates could be declared a historic district, 9 historic buildings, of which city staff, I think, generously argued we'd like to just keep one out of 9. There was none of that discussion. There was waiting until the last possible minute to present the plans to city staff, council, the public during the holidays, minimal with the absolute last-minute presentation of the plans. And I think that's reflected in that you only had 5 minutes and you only had two speakers who came in opposition. There just isn't enough time for deliberation. I argued when we chose the convention center site that we were moving too fast, we weren't contemplating everything, and this week we're seeing the implications of that decision, I believe. The difference here is that this is not reversible. We can move the convention center site in response to new information. Once this decision is made, obviously these buildings are gone forever. We're running out of these buildings, and I would ask that this body take that into the contextual argument, not look at the bus station in a silo, but that Oklahoma City has demolished and demolished and demolished its history. And we are running out of buildings. The Film Exchange building in the Court Shore Park is likely to go. 8 of these buildings, with all their history, Hotel Black and Clara Looper and the children out there, and decades of history, is now going to be demolished. We're asking for 1 of 9 buildings, and we're asking that you consider that context, that we're running out of buildings. Secondly, along that lines, I just want to point out that planning got a minimal amount of opportunity. We had big conversations with Hines, which I understand Hines is doing buildings in Houston where they're incorporating the parking garage into the development. So Hines is certainly capable, and I believe privately is saying gives preference to that kind of, but is being pushed by the specific developer into this kind of development, even though I believe it knows that there are alternatives that could be considered and could be presented. There was no consideration of, no involvement of the economic development team. We have tremendous assets at the city's disposal to help augment this development and incorporate at least a minimal amount of adaptive reuse into the redevelopment. TIF number 2 is producing much more revenue than anticipated. Its estimated budget is now about $126 million. We still have about $40 million at our disposal. That's without the Clayco development. That's without this 499 Hines, which will put even more money into TIF number 2. That's tens of millions of dollars that could be used to increase the economic viability of this particular, of the Union bus station. That's in addition to city staff telling you that this particular building is eligible for the National Registry. That would make it eligible for historic tax credits. You had a letter from Mr. Preftakis to the DDRC saying, I think with a restaurant, my return on investment would be about 2.5%, and that's just not enough. 2.5% as a starting place, and then you add TIF funds, right, which we've done over and over for buildings with inadequate infrastructure. The Century Center would be the most relevant example, right? We gave $1 million to the Oklahoman for their rebuild because of the condition of some of the innards of the building. That's exactly what TIF funds should be used for, in my opinion, is to make it more economically viable. That plus the historic tax credits creates tremendous economically viable opportunities for this building. Finally, in this haste, this decision is going to tie development, the council's ability for development in this area. It's going to adversely impact development in this area. For whatever reason, we couldn't wait until the traffic study was presented. It was told to the DDRC that the traffic study would come any minute or any day, but that they had had a phone conversation with those doing the study telling us that the level of service on Walker from this development was going to be very poor, that we were going to have to abandon our 2 lanes of traffic and go to 4 lanes and abandon our bike lanes. It's going to ripple through the system. I cannot imagine that entities like Clayco are not looking at Walker and this alley, this dead alley that we're creating that human beings do not feel comfortable walking down with enormous parking garages on both sides of them. We're creating a dead alley, and it's going to adversely impact development. And I'm just asking that we have more than 30 days, that our planning department have more than 30 days, that our economic development team have more than 30 days, that the city council have more than 30 days to process this information and how this is going to ripple through the system. We are moving too fast. We've been burned over and over and over by moving too fast, including this week on the Convention Center land. And I'm appealing to this body not to just to send it back and let there be more study and more input. We have the time to do that. And because of the context, because this is the end of the road, because this is the end of an era to tie future generations back to previous generations, I appeal to you to give that especially high import. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Siddiq.
Good afternoon. David Box, 522 Colcord Drive. Today, I have the opportunity to be before the board on behalf of the developer of this site, Hines. What we have is an amazing opportunity before this city and before this board, and it's an amazing opportunity that does not come around very often. I think it is important to note at the start that this process was not rushed. This process has been evolving for months and months and months. In fact, the DDRC, when they voted January 15th of 2015, that was the second time that the DDRC heard and discussed this case. Before Christmas in December, this case went before the DDRC. And sometime in the fall, months and months before that, we started working with staff. So this was not a decision that was rushed. It was a decision that was thought out, was worked out with staff, with a lot of care. I think it's important to start at the ordinance. I want to make sure everybody has a copy of the handout. These are documents that are part of the record, but instead of printing out 900-something pages and asking you all to go through that, I handed out just a few of the documents we found to be relevant to our discussion, and I've tabbed them for ease. Now, it is important to note that the scope of this appeal is limited to the demolition decision on one building. Before the DDRC was a CA for 9 separate buildings, as well as all of the design elements of this project. The DDRC approved all design elements of this project, and they approved all 9 demolitions. So when we started the ordinance, which is tab 1, as my opponent did discuss, it does say shall. And it says that the Downtown Design Review Committee and staff shall apply the guidelines. But then it limits itself, and it says, as appropriate to the specific site. So the DDRC did follow the guidelines, but they are just guidelines. And they have to look as appropriate to the specific site. And they felt, and we urge this board to feel, that when we look at the specific site, the demolition is appropriate. The other 2 places that reference demolition, it says it should be rehabilitated. Again, in sub A, under 59-7200, it says, again, it should be retained. And so what that really means is we've got to balance the equities. We have to balance the opportunity that we have presented with what we're asking to be done. And here, demolish the bus station. The DDRC felt that the opportunities and the equities warranted demolition. We hope after our presentation that the board also feels the same way. And so what we have to look at is, what is the opportunity? What are we being asked to do? And if you turn to tab 2, and I know that we've been before the board on another topic before, and the board has seen this, but I think it's worth looking at what the opportunity really is. What the opportunity is the first multi-tenant office building in downtown since 1984. That's almost my entire lifetime that there hasn't been another opportunity like this for this city. I think it's significant. I think it's worth our time to look through these images. I think they're spectacular, and it's something that was worked out not only with staff, but significant time was spent before the DDRC. The meeting in the meeting in December took a couple hours, but the meeting in January, as I recall, was like a 4.5-hour marathon. So it wasn't taken lightly. In fact, the hearing started in the morning, and it got done after Planning Commission was supposed to start, as Ms. Powers will remember. So it was a well thought out and vetted process. A lot has been made about the fact that there is a significant amount of parking in this application. And I think it's important to hear what several of the speakers that appeared that day before the DDRC said about parking. And I'm going to start with Ms. Debbie Holtzclaw, who works for the Central Oklahoma Transportation and Parking Authority. She says that they own and operate 5 of the city's public parking garages and several surface lots, accounting for almost 5,000 parking spaces. The past 2 years, we've been averaging 115 to 120% occupancy. She goes on to say, I receive calls weekly, either from business owners needing to hire or wanting to hire additional employees, or property managers looking to lease space, and they're all looking for parking, and they don't have it. Next, Mr. Mark Beffert appeared, and he told the DDRC that when they expanded the City Center East Garage, they were pre-committed at 130% capacity before they even started construction of the garage. They currently have a waiting list of over 100 people on just 2 small garages. So there is a lot of parking, but it's not excess. It's enough parking to satisfy the needs of this project, and at the end, there's only approximately 100 extra spaces. And with every garage and surface lot at overcapacity, I submit to this board that that will be gobbled up really quickly. One of the unique features about this case is that it has gone through a significant process. You've heard about the 2 different cases before the DDRC, but additionally, there has been an element that went to the Planning Commission. There was an alley closure. The Planning Commission recommended approval. That will be heard by the council later. It came before this body. The Board of Adjustment granted a couple variances to certain site design elements. And it also, in a form, went to council. There was an application that the council appeal this decision, and the council voted to not appeal this decision. So it's not the norm where you have a particular case or project that all of these different bodies have heard the application, have thought about the application, and vetted the application. Now, I want to address the brief that was submitted, and I believe it's attached as Exhibit A. It's in your staff report, and some of the claims in there. One of the claims that you heard and you've read about in the brief is that the DDRC erred in some way by not following the staff recommendation. As this board knows, staff comes up with staff reports. They provide recommendations. Those recommendations are non-binding. When you look at the Planning Commission staff reports, there's even a notation on there that they're non-binding. Now, Board of Adjustment cases, they don't normally have recommendations because it's a quasi-judicial body and we have positive factors, negative factors. But recommendations are non-binding, and to suggest that they're anything other than non-binding renders the entire public hearing process meaningless. Volunteers just like yourself and at all these other bodies, if they were required to follow a staff recommendation, why would you be volunteering your time down here? They're free to take the recommendation, but based on the merits of a particular case, they're free to render whatever decision they deem appropriate. Next, the brief, and the brief is referencing the staff report, claims that the bus station is one of a kind. Staff was mistaken. This particular piece of architectural type is called Art Moderne. And we did a brief study based on the Historical Society of Oklahoma, to see how many other pieces of art moderne we could find. If you turn to tab 3 in your book, we found 31 different pieces of art moderne architecture in our city. And I just want to look at a couple real briefly. Now, I've had these Bates numbers for your convenience. If you turn to Art Mod 1.2, that is the Hart Building on Film Row. That's significant to us because that's just a couple of blocks from here. Next, if you turn to 1.6, that is the Midtown Orthopedic. Again, it's relatively close proximity to the subject site. Next, 1.8, Will Rogers Theater. Next, 1.13, the Walker Street Office Park, which is at 600 North Walker, just up the street from the subject site. Finally, 1.24, which is the Oklahoma Theater Supply Company, again on Film Row, and again just a matter of blocks from the site. So the bus station isn't one of a kind. It's one of at least 31 that just we could find with minimal research, and there are several other examples in very close proximity. Additionally, the brief suggests that the bus station was part of the original downtown development at its core as spurned by the 1928 oil discovery. That's not accurate. This is significantly west of where the original core development would have been. That would have been somewhere closer to Broadway. This building was built in 1941, so it really didn't have, it wasn't spurned by that oil development or the oil find. Again, the brief, and we've touched on this, but the brief claims that the DDRC acted in direct contradiction to the city code. And as we've addressed, the city code does not have standards. There's no criteria in which you've got to check the box to be able to demolish. It's a balancing test that the DDRC and now you, the Board of Adjustment, must apply. And you must apply it as appropriate to the site. And you must go to the next section where it says it should be rehabilitated. And obviously, because we use the word should, it means we've got to look at all the other relevant factors. Finally, the issue of the Historic Preservation Commission hearing the case, we addressed that at the DDRC, and what we told them and what we're telling you is there is nothing that the HP Commission could hear that we're not presenting to you. There's nothing that the HP Commission could hear that we didn't present to the DDRC. And the DDRC had plenty of information and felt they were in position to make a vote, and we urge you to do the same. If there are any questions about the site, we're going to address them. We have all the information necessary. There's nothing that could be done by going to the HP Commission. And it was referenced that they're mandated to send something like this to the HP. That's not accurate. Every board and commission in this city has the ability, if they wanted to send it to the HP. I would submit to this board, there's no reason to submit it to the HP Commission. We're going to give you all the information you would need to make a decision. Now, the DDRC decision made without regard to the traffic study, within that argument, the brief says, and I quote, the level of service is poor given the current proposed location of the parking garage next to Walker Avenue, end quote. That is not factual. That's not what was said at the DDRC hearing. That's not what the traffic study says. What a traffic study does is it looks at a particular area. It assumes full build-out of multiple developments at a time in the future. The traffic study reference to level of service poor had nothing to do with the location of a parking garage in our project. The next part says, indicated the study would, quote, show consequences would ripple through downtown traffic circulation due to the location of the parking garage in the southwest corner of the Union, where the Union bus station sits, end quote. Again, that's not factual. Nothing said before the DDRC discussed a ripple effect. Nothing in the traffic study discusses ripple effect. As you know, a traffic study looks at a finite area when it's determining what level of service it is. So there was no discussion about a ripple effect. Now, I would submit to this board that the traffic issue is a design element of a site. What's before this board are the merits of a CA to demolish a building, not a parking garage, not a traffic issue. The merits on traffic deal with the site design issue. That wasn't appealed. That was unanimously approved by the DDRC, and I would submit that it's not an issue before you. If you want specifics about what a traffic study does and what this one might say, we do have representatives from TEC who performed the traffic study. But so I can give you a picture, this traffic study, when it set out to find the level of service, it looked at full build-out of our site. It looked at full build-out of the Clayco site, which includes 2 office towers, 2 potential apartment towers. It looked at full build-out of the site south of the school for a mixed-use development, and it also looked at full build-out of the convention center. And as the body now knows, that convention center won't go there. But what it's projecting is traffic in 2025. But as I said, that was addressed at the DDRC. That's a site design issue, and the DDRC granted approval for that, and it was not appealed. And one of the DDRC members had what I thought was a great quote. When we look at traffic, as Ms. Powers knows, we always hear about Traffic and Planning Commission. We deal with traffic out in the suburbs. People don't like traffic where they live. And I found it, I don't know if funny is the right word, but directly on point when Mr. Tannenbaum, who's a DDRC member, said, quote, "The traffic, hey, we used to complain that there was no traffic. I like traffic. Let's go traffic." You know what big cities have in their downtown? Traffic. So we want development. We haven't had a tower in 30 years, and now we're concerned about traffic. That's what we want. That means you have people coming to your downtown. Traffic in your downtown is a good thing. It's been suggested that TIF dollars could be used to help the economic feasibility of the Union Bus Station. We came up with a scenario where we plugged in TIF dollars. We ran a pro forma. And when you add debt service, assuming favorable TIF dollars given to this site, which we assume $290,000, because as you know, you get money based on the increase in the taxes after the development, the return is in the negative. Based on what we paid and based on debt service, even if you add TIF dollars, the return goes negative. Then we added federal tax credits for historical, state tax credits. Again, the return goes in the negative. Now, the owner of this site is stuck in Dallas. The snowstorm that came 12 hours late prevented him from being here today. So in his absence, he has asked that we read a letter in that he was not able, since he was not able to be here. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. O'Neill, who is going to read Mr. Preftake's letter.
If you would, sir, just give us your name and address for the record.
I am Mike O'Neill at 522 Colcord Drive. I'm reading this on behalf of Nick Preftakes, whose address is 825 North Broadway, Oklahoma City. He says, "Members of the Board of Adjustment, I am the managing member of Sheridan Redevelopers, LLC, which owns the Union Bus Station building on 427 West Sheridan Avenue. I regret not being able to speak to you in person today, but the winter weather has granted my flight to Oklahoma, and I am currently stuck in Dallas. However, it is important for you to know the economic feasibility of restoring the Union Bus Station, so I've asked Michael O'Neill to read this letter on my behalf. For over 30 years, I have focused on investing in, developing, redeveloping, and operating commercial real estate properties in Oklahoma City and in other areas of the country. These experiences have given me a firm understanding of the economics of Oklahoma City, as well as knowledge of when it is economically viable to restore a property. I am a pioneer of restoring properties in downtown Oklahoma City. Buildings I have restored include the Hudson Essex Building at Northwest 8th Street and Broadway, the Garage Lofts at Northwest 13th Street and Broadway, and the RCB Bank Building at 701 North Broadway, which used to be Nichols Hills Bank. There have been times when I have had to demolish a building for new construction, but when economically viable to restore a building, I have taken great care to preserve or pay tribute to the historic or architectural uniqueness of each existing structure. After careful deliberation and review of the economics of the Union Bus Station, I have concluded that it is simply not economically feasible to restore the Union Bus Station. Let me explain why. I invested $2 million to acquire the Union Bus Station. Restoring the bus station would require replacing the roof, as well as the stairwells and handrails. An elevator must be installed to comply with code and accessibility requirements. None of the mechanical, electrical, or plumbing systems in the building are functional and must be replaced. Further, the building does not have a fire sprinkler system. Additionally, the building has flooded and incurred significant water damage in the basement, which is infested with mold and mildew from floor to ceiling. It would cost over $1.53 million to restore the bus station, bring it into code compliance, and provide minimal site improvements. The best rental rate I could expect from the bus station after restoration is $130,000 per year under a triple net lease. Financing would be required for 80% of the total investment, and I would be fortunate to obtain a conservative financing rate of 6% if financing could even be obtained. That means after financing costs, I could expect a return of negative 5.63%. This rate of loss is prohibitively poor, especially given the risk of restoration expenses and maintaining a revenue-generating tenant. Banks would not be interested in financing a project with a negative return and high risk. It has also been suggested that historic tax credits could be applied to restore the Union Bus Station, thereby reducing out-of-pocket restoration costs and increasing the return on investment. The historic tax credits for such a project are the 20% federal and 20% state historic tax credits for rehabilitation of certified historic structures, and the 10% federal historic tax credit for the rehabilitation of non-historic, non-residential buildings that were built before 1936. The federal tax credits are mutually exclusive, meaning only one of the federal tax credits may be applied to the project. Since the Union Bus Station was built in 1941, it is not eligible for the 10% federal historic tax credit. The 20% federal rehabilitation tax credit may apply to buildings built after 1936, but such a credit is not automatic. You must prove the property made a significant historical contribution, and it must be a certified historic structure, which is not a certainty. Further, the rehabilitative work must meet standards set by the Secretary of the Interior, which would increase restoration costs. The state 20% rehabilitation tax credit is subject to essentially the same requirements as its federal counterpart. A third possible tax advantage aimed at increasing return on investment would be a facade easement deduction. For a facade easement deduction, the facade of the structure is preserved and donated to a qualified organization as an easement, resulting in a charitable donation that is tax deductible. However, if you claim the 20% federal rehabilitation tax credit, the amount of credit received reduces the facade easement deduction by as much as the same amount. Facade deductions for a building constructed after 1936 also require approval, which is not a certainty. The allowable facade deduction would have a minimal impact and would be significantly outweighed by the detrimental impacts of a facade easement. All that being said, assuming I could obtain enough rehabilitation tax credits to reduce eligible restoration and improvement costs by 40%, the best return on investment I could expect is a negative 4.05%. Again, financing for such a project with such high risk and poor return on investment would be impossible. It has also been suggested that the tax increment financing funding could be obtained. TIF funding is speculative, but assuming TIF funding equal to roughly 8% of the total project, or $290,000, the returns are still negative, although I would lose only 2.1% on my investment annually with state and federal historic tax credits and the TIF funds. No bank will be interested in financing a project which, in the best case scenario, runs a deficit after financing costs. Now, some have tried to cast doubt on these economic realities by suggesting that there have been groups such as Good Egg who were willing and able to repurpose the Union Bus Station. Sure, over the years, someone would come along, kicking the tires, as it were, and inquire about the building. But no one, I repeat, no one, has ever come forward with a viable plan to make a repurposed bus station work economically, including Good Egg. You know why? Because repurposing the bus station won't work, and even if it could for a time, the risk would be unreasonable given the negative returns. However, the land upon which the Union Bus Station is located is economically viable, particularly as part of an assemblage with a developer like Hines stepping forward with a plan that is certain to work, a plan that already comes with an anchor tenant, one who is unmatched in stability and reliability and committed to contributing to the great renaissance in downtown Oklahoma City. Thank you for your time in listening to my analysis and conclusions about the economic feasibility of restoring the Union Bus Station. Respectfully, Nicholas J. Preftakes. I have reviewed the analysis done by Nick Preftakes, and if there are questions about his conclusions, I'm prepared to talk.
Actually, if I could, before we take any more testimony, I'd like to address the other board members and address the subject of the traffic study. And as we've heard the presentation, there may be some questions in my mind or some curiosity about the traffic study, but I am going to concur with Mr. Box that the traffic study is not a part of the application in the business before us today, and that in our deliberations, the traffic study and the progress of the traffic study should not be a part of our deliberations. As board members, you certainly have the discretion to agree with that or disagree, but that's my position, is that we should not take testimony regarding the traffic study, and we should not consider the traffic study as part of this deliberation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a few more points. I want to really focus in on 427 West Sheridan, the bus station. In the DDRC staff report that is part of the record, part of the 900 pages of documents you have, what the staff report says about the bus station is the following. Quote, "It is best known for the distinctive projecting vertical neon sign," end quote. The staff report recommended that we try to use elements of the bus station in this new project. What the DDRC was shown in December was this. This is the corner in which the bus station currently sits. And there was discussion that it didn't do enough. It didn't do enough to honor the bus station. And so between the December hearing and the January hearing, we came back with a design that takes into consideration the best known distinctive character of this building. The wonderful sign will be refurbished, it'll be repurposed, it'll be put in that glass beacon. The blue tiles that everyone knows about will be used if they can. If not, we will have something made to look just like it. So the bus station is honored, and everybody knows where the bus station was. And I submit to you, just like I submitted to the DDRC, this is a better scenario for the bus station. The bus station was built for a single purpose. And at that hearing, Mr. Tannenbaum again discussed that issue. As many of you know, Mr. Tannenbaum owns and was the developer of the Montgomery Ward building. And he said, and I quote, "One comment on the bus terminal. When I redeveloped what is now the Montgomery, we had a lot of issues with the bus terminal and their clientele. So I approached Global Greyhound in Dallas, and I went to see them to buy the building. And we worked on that a little bit before Nick was brave enough to take it on. It's a disaster. They themselves said, we got to get out of here. We don't pass code. It's in awful condition. It was a single-purpose building that is no longer used as a single purpose." When we set out and made our applications, it wasn't without careful thought. It was after 4 independent studies on each and every building were conducted. Those are found in your tabs, tab 4, 5, 6, and 7, and I want to address just a couple as we move forward. Tab 4 is an architectural field study done by Kendall, Heaton, and Associates. And if we turn to page 1.2, I'm going to address some of the findings. First, the building visually from the exterior appears to be in poor condition. The integrity of the interior envelope is in question. Mold and mildew are prevalent throughout the occupied spaces. 1.3, the basement is unacceptable for human occupancy. 1.4, The basement level would be considered dilapidated and would warrant notice for condemnation. 1.5. There would need to be changes to the structural elements that would be extensive. And finally, in the conclusion, as a result of years of neglect, there is a considerable amount of water damage, which has led to an unsafe level of mold and mildew throughout the building. Conditions are unsatisfactory on a building code level, but as well as from a health and safety standpoint, which in its current condition is uninhabitable and subject to condemnation. The next study at tab 5 is a study done by Alvin Engineering, the MEP field observation. I want to highlight what's found on page 1.7, where it says, any reuse of the building would require replacement of all mechanical and electrical systems. The entire mechanical and electrical systems within this building are completely destroyed. Finally, tab 7, which is the Walter P. Moore structural field observation, at page 1.6, noticed significant deterioration of the reinforced concrete members. So, in conclusion, what we have is a building that has outlived its purpose. We have a building that is located on a key piece of real estate in downtown Oklahoma City. We have a building that, as it currently sits, stands in the way of an amazing opportunity for this city. This piece of property is a prime piece of property, and as Mr. Preftek said, the value in this is assemblage for a large-scale development, just as is presented today. We think that the modifications done to this corner, introducing elements of the bus station into the design, is a better way to honor the bus station. We think that the DDRC was correct in their interpretation of the guidelines, and based on the merits of the application, was correct. They were correct in deciding to demolish this building. We would ask that you uphold the decision of the DDRC in approving demolition of this bus station and allowing this opportunity to be realized. Be happy to answer any questions.
Councilor, during the DDRC hearing, Mr. Picard, his first name Jeff? John Picard, made a comment that he looked at the bus station, or looked at the development. He's actually referencing a couple buildings. We're focused on the bus station. And said that in no way it makes no sense to incorporate them. He wishes he had a different answer, but there's not. Can you discuss, I understand the integrity portion, you don't need to go through that again, but can you discuss why, I'm going to narrow this down, if they're trying to preserve the sign and the blue tiles, and we're being asked to consider the preservation of the larger structure by incorporating it into the development, as Mr. Lawler has argued, and Dr. Shadid, can you tell me why the building can't be incorporated? What is the limiting factor for Hines and their inability to do that?
One of the issues when you read through the transcript that Mr. Picard discussed was, if you do that, you're having to add parking decks to the parking garages.
And I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to make sure I get this. So, and that's because the floor plate of the parking, of the design of the block, if we start to go vertical, that inhibits the development. So the only thing we can do is go out and make full use of the block itself for floor plates. Is that what you're saying?
I don't want to speak for Mr. Picard, and I'm certainly not an architect, but the discussion before the DDRC was, when you do that, you start having to reconfigure parking structures. And to get the number that is needed and warranted from this development and needed downtown, you start adding decks. And the comment that was made was, any parking deck consultant that you can find across the country will tell you 9 floors is about the absolute limit in which you can build up. And we would have to go higher than that. And the public just doesn't like it. And so then the cost becomes excessive and it loses functionality as you start adding decks.
One other question I have, sorry, I don't mean to monopolize, I hope I'm not doing that, but one other question that I have is there was I want to make sure I get this correct, there was a speaker, Tony Blatt, who spoke in opposition, and he says that, I'm going to read from the transcript. This is on page 83, lines 11 through 16. It says, "It is our hope that the Downtown Design Review Committee will consider denial of the demolition application unless significant changes are made to the proposal that address the preservation of the historic structures and a greater significance assigned for street-level pedestrian activity." In your client's view, and if there's somebody that's better equipped to speak on this might be appropriate, have you guys looked at that, at the recommendation of, or at the request of these people and at the request of the appellant, looked at that request and determined that that's simply, you've done that to the best of your ability? Are you comfortable saying that?
It's a great question, and it's a question and topic that was discussed extensively in December and then again in January. And the comment that was made in December was that the retail that we're providing along Sheridan and along certain elements over here on the other garage, it wasn't deep enough, it wasn't meaningful retail space. And when we came back in January, I don't know if it was doubled, but we added a significant amount of retail. We added to the depth of the retail. We did everything that we knew we could do to ensure that if retail is viable and the market demands it, we have spaces ready to go.
But what about the historical significant piece of that request, the piece of requesting that they address incorporating these historical structures? What?
And that was addressed, and here's what we've got with this block. Staff's report discussed that there's a possibility that the entire block could be eligible to be listed as a district. And what we have in the 9 buildings is not a rare intact group of buildings. What we have is a random assemblage of buildings at this point. The Hotel Black was renovated, I believe it was in the 80s, into an office tower. And with that renovation, it removed a significant amount of the historical integrity of that building. The entire first floor and the exterior facade was redone to brick. That would probably take it out of eligibility for being listed on the register. One of the buildings that would have been to the east of the bus station was already demolished. You have several buildings on the north side that significant architectural features were removed, thereby limiting its ability to be listed. And when we provided that testimony at the DDRC, I think it was clear that I don't even believe that you could list this block as a district. It has lost so much of its historical integrity, I believe over 50%, where it wouldn't even be eligible at this point.
You outlined in that meeting, you outlined the process that's required, and so it's your position that because the integrity of those structures is not met, thus it doesn't qualify.
Correct.
I think it's appropriate, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, I'd like to have a response from appellant on that specific point.
Certainly.
Thank you. Travis Lawler, again, for the appellant. In response to your question, I don't think that, and I think a response to your question goes to the greater issue that's being debated here today, which is all of the technical details, and they all surround the question of, can something more be done here to incorporate the historical, specifically the historical significance and architecture and existence of the Union Bus Station? He referenced a couple other buildings. Obviously, we're focusing on the Union Bus Station today, and that's the question at issue. Can something more be done? I would urge the board to simply say, we don't know, because it's never was presented to the Downtown Design Review Committee with all of the information at hand. If you think the answer to that question is no, that nothing more can be done to preserve the Union Bus Station, whether it be as a full building with a business commercial use or preserving the facade or anything more than the sign that they've proposed and the blue tile, then I would proffer that you believe the answer is no because you're listening to the evidence and the specific technical points that the developers have put forth about economic viability, about the integrity of the building. Obviously, the building's in bad shape, but I mean, if we look around the country, some of the most preserved historical buildings started off in bad shape. Sometimes it does cost money to preserve the things that should be preserved. My point is, in answering your question, that I don't think anyone really knows the true economic feasibility or the true preservation viability of this building unless you take all of the technical aspects that they say is true. You would be doing that, and the Downtown Design Review Committee did that without the luxury of having other input. It was, as Dr. Shadid said, this was moved through fast in the sense that, yes, this has been planned, this project's been in the planning stages for a long time, but actually seeing the designs and then seeing the updated designs, that all happened late last year and just before the January 15th hearing. My point is that without additional input to the Downtown Design Review Committee from the Historical Preservation Society, maybe from the Economic Development Team of Oklahoma City, which did contribute funds to the first Devon Tower, the Oklahoman Building, and the Clayco project, that maybe some of these economic feasibilities or even the historical viability might have a different answer than what the developer would proffer because they have the ability to have everything before the Downtown Design Review Committee. I agree with the chair of the board that the traffic study is not before the board today. It's because it wasn't before the board in the original presentation either. Obviously, a lot of the presentation on January 15th was about traffic, and it's of a concern. I want traffic too. I want development, but I don't just want it blindly without being well thought out. I think if we went around the country, we would find downtown areas that were redeveloped, some of which have great traffic patterns, some of which have terrible ones. And that's the kind of thing we want to avoid here in Oklahoma City. We do want development, we do want traffic, but it needs to be well thought out. The traffic study is not before the board because it wasn't completed and in time to be presented when the Downtown Design Review Committee made their decision to raise the buildings. It may very well be that after analysis of all of the possible information, including information in addition to what the developer puts forward, that the Downtown Design Review Committee or this board might have the same analysis. Our appeal is based only in the sense of developing Oklahoma City in the type of structured and responsible way that will take into account all the information possible. I would proffer that these debates that we're having here today may or may not be properly heard by this board, but I think that they're more appropriately heard in the grand presentation. In the January 15th, when we spent hours talking about this back and forth, there's more information that could have been put at play there. We're asking for some delay of the decision to raise the Union Bus Station in order to have all the information before this board and the Downtown Design Review Committee.
Mr. Waller, there was a comment in the record of DDRC that within a month there could be a historic report provided. There could be some of that homework done. Today is March 4th or 5th, I don't know, one of those days. And is there any report, has any work been done in that manner to try to refute what they've offered up is that because the building doesn't have the integrity that would be necessitated for historical designation and preservation, that it simply is irrelevant?
Well, the answer to your question is no, not of substance, but I believe that the important aspect of that report would be reports from the Economic Development Team and the Historical Preservation Committee, but the authority for them to gather and spend their time and energy to do that is one that isn't necessarily proffered from a public citizen. This is something that's contemplated by the regulations as far as the Historical Preservation Committee goes, and I believe that's more appropriately put before the Historical Preservation Committee officially from the city or the developer. With respect to the Economic Development Team, really there's been no communication whatsoever because of the developer's position that there is absolutely no economic viability in this, so they don't want to entertain any possibility of looking at whether this building can be refurbished either in part or in whole. And I want to be clear, I don't think that they have not looked at that and that they don't want to. I'm just offering, and this appeal offers, that when we're going to tear down some of the most historical or the oldest or whatever adjective you want to give to them, important buildings in the city, that we do them methodically, we do them slowly, and we do them with all the information before the committee, before they make a decision. There was a number of things addressed by council, and again, I'm happy to stand here and answer any questions. I'm happy to keep going through point by point, but I think our position is best left at that concept that the traffic report, the Historical Preservation Committee, any information from the economic development team. None of that was before the committee in a well-thought-out and presented manner before the decision to raise the buildings was made.
Just a couple questions, and I'll try to be as succinct as possible, but it seems like that in Section 597200G, it gives the DDRC the ability that they shall apprise the guidelines, and we kind of say that's a balancing act. And if I'm reading your argument right, or your presentation right, and your brief right, you're arguing that under 594250.3, it says that the committee may request projects on the non-binding recommendation of the HP. That hasn't been, that was not done, that was not, it's may, not shall, I get that. But from my examination of the record, the land has a very unique history and a unique story of all the different things it has been. You point to the milk bottle and the gold dome in your deal. I think those are very architecturally, historically unique points that are not duplicated throughout Oklahoma City. I agree with that statement. And then the other side gives us 31 examples of art moderne that incorporate stylistically some of the curves and the windows, etc. What I'm asking you is the question that I don't really grasp right now. If you are arguing that the case should be remanded, what can you lean upon right now, and you want that committee to go back and ask the HP what, you know, even though it's non-binding, what makes this piece of property historically unique? What characteristics can we take away? I mean, they've said, well, it's like 30 other pieces of property in Oklahoma City. Help me make that bridge happen. Explain to me.
Can I comment about that? You know, I think when you're talking about what makes something historically significant, it's not just the type of architecture that you're talking about. I mean, this facility, this bus station, I think sort of is an emblem of, in some ways, it's a period piece, clearly. But it's kind of an emblem of the growth of Oklahoma City. You know, countless people have come into and out of the city through this location. And as the city has grown, you know, it has stood there and ferried them back and forth. And I think there certainly are other examples of art moderne architecture, but I don't think that's the only criteria that you look at.
I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying if their premise is to remand it and they want the HP to take a look at it, give me an argument as to why that should occur.
Well, I would say that would be one. I also have to say that as a person who sits on both the Planning Commission and the City Council and the Board of Adjustment, one of the things that I find frustrating, I also have a very close working relationship with the Traffic Commissioner for Ward 2, which is kind of unusual. But so we talk about this sort of this cross interests in various applications. And one of the things that's kind of frustrating for me is that when a project like this, which is this enormous, you know, significant project that's being proposed, is going through the process, you only see little bits and pieces of it. You know, Mr. Box alluded to the fact that this had been before the Planning Commission. Well, what was before the Planning Commission was whether or not to close off an alley, you know, in part of a street. We weren't being asked to pass on whether we thought this was a good idea or not as a project. The application that came before us as a board had to do with, you know, design details. We weren't being asked to pass on whether we thought the project was a good idea or not. And I think, of course, these projects take a very long time to plan, and there's a lot of back and forth and give and take that goes on during that process. But once they are packaged, once they are more or less final, and that's always a little bit of a moving target, Very often, the action on them does happen very rapidly. And that's always been, for me, on this side of the horseshoe, a problem. It's always been a frustration and a difficulty. I think it would be a wonderful thing if the HP Commission would weigh in on this. I think it would be a great thing if we were able to get as much input as we can, including input from the citizens of Oklahoma City about whether it's a good idea for us to tear down the bus station or not.
I guess where I'm going, Janice, is that even if we were to do that, that's non-binding as far as the HP's concern, or the HP's recommendation is.
More information would be better.
But
traffic, HP, I mean, I think...
let's leave traffic off the table because I think some of us agree that that's off. I'm asking them, if that were to happen, what characteristics are unique in their mind to get me over that hurdle? That's what I'm asking. And I agree that you've stated that it is, that one of the uniquenesses was a transportation hub.
May I interrupt now? I know Mr. Fox wants to speak again. My personal preference, and those of you that have been before this board and have served with me know that I value historic preservation greatly and have argued for historic preservation on any number of occasions. DDRC had discretion. They did not have a standard to apply. They had guidelines. The staff report is non-binding. It is a resource available to them. The ability to go to HP was a resource that was available for them. And in this case, they've chosen not to utilize that resource. When you go back and review the hearings, they talked to this developer and asked that developer to incorporate more retail and more elements of the bus station. I think there's an appreciation by DDRC for the significance of that structure. But they had the authority and they had the discretion. And I'm not in favor of just tearing down things or not fully considering the matter before us. But I do not see where they didn't fully consider the matter or where they, acted outside their authority or acted improperly. I'll also reference when we heard the Stage Center demolition request, and that was a very unique structure, and we heard from a number of people in the community that had worked diligently for years and years and years to find economic viability in that structure, and I think everybody was reluctant to acknowledge that we had done everything that was possible to do that. And I remember Dr. Bob Blackburn from the State Historical Society made a statement that not every old structure can or should be saved. And I think when we think in the context of historic preservation, we think of it's old or because it's been on that corner since 1941 and because, many visitors and residents have traveled, to and from our community, and gone through that station, that we're sentimental about it and we have memories. But in the new plan from the architect and from the developer, I see elements that honor that corner. And I'm understanding of your position and Dr. Shadid, but I feel like, DDRC acted within their authority and acted properly, and they had resources available to them, and they made the decision about, which recommendations and which resources to take advantage of.
If I may briefly address the points of the board, you're talking about the DDRC having the authority and that some of the guidelines are just that, guidelines, they're recommendations, that there's not a standard to follow. And I do understand that argument from a legal standpoint. However, I would argue that in making their decision, in following these guidelines, they did not have all of the information available before them in order to properly apply the guidelines. The staff report contemplated that. There's been a lot of talk.
But that's a matter of opinion. It's obvious that they felt like that they had enough information to make the decision that they did. We could argue about whether, in our opinion, they did, or whether they heard everything that they should have heard. But in their opinion, they heard enough, and they had enough information to make the decision that they made. So if you and I disagree or you disagree with what they did, it's just a matter of us disagreeing in our perception. But they had the authority, and they felt like, that they had done their due diligence in terms of vetting this application and this request.
I would respond to that only by saying two things. Number one, if such a position mandates that we're drawing a line in the sand, that if the decision has to be made by a certain point in time with the information that's readily available at that time, and that if the decision made is wrong or right is really of no consequence, in the sense that the line in the sand was reached, the time in the timeline was reached, and that there's no ability to go back and review the decisions made with additional information. The balance that's taking place here is a tough one. I would argue that this is the exact type of case that the referring of a development consideration or decision like this to the HP, to the Historical Preservation Commission, why is it in the regulations if it's not to be used in a situation just like this? Now, again, you're arguing that we do not have to go back and make them do that, and I understand that argument. I would only say to that the fact that the people who drew up these guidelines even contemplated that the Historical Preservation Committee would be involved is a reason to go back and have this reviewed.
I believe that they were simply outlining the resources that were available to DDRC, the staff report, which they're going to get, and they had access to HP if they felt like that they needed that or desired that.
Mr. Chairman, are you suggesting that the only way that we can modify or reverse the decision of the DDRC is if we find that they have exceeded their authority?
No. I'm simply saying that I do not find that DDRC exceeded the authority that they had to interpret the guidelines that were before them. That's my point.
I do not know why the HP was not involved in the original decision. I only know that the regulations contemplate their involvement, and if not for a set of buildings or a building like this, then what would they be pulled in a downtown design review committee to review?
But as I interpret this, DDRC has the discretion on whether to utilize that resource. This request was not in front of HP. This was in front of DDRC, and they simply had the availability of HP should they desired it.
Well, and this appeal isn't only grounded in the fact that there was not a recommendation or a review done by HP. That's an integral part, I think, but same way with non-recommendation or non-review by the economic development team. However, this appeal is grounded in the concept that this decision was made hastily and rushed through, not the whole design of the project, but after getting the redesigns with the corner of the Union Bus Station. It went back before the board on the committee, on January 15th, and that a decision was made without all of the information before them. I'm arguing that overturning that decision is necessary in this case because the guidelines say they shall be applied to the best of the committee's ability, and that here, I believe the guidelines were not applied in the determination of that balancing. What we're talking about here, I think opposing side, everyone would agree. We're talking about what the guidelines say, which is balancing economic development and the future growth of the city with historical preservation. And how do you get that right? And in order to get it right, we're arguing in this appeal that that decision is only properly made after review of all the available information. The board initially started this back and forth question session with, well, what makes this site unique, and what's different from these other 32 properties with the same architectural design? Well, even the Stage Center. This property, these set of buildings and the Union Bus Station is unique because this is the core of Oklahoma City. The board addressed earlier how this bus station is where the people of Oklahoma City came for generations when they came west or even east to prosper in a thriving new land. Obviously, Oklahoma City's had booms and busts, but the Downtown Design Review Committee staff report in Section B states, this site is near the core of the original Oklahoma City settlement. Around the turn of the century, early retail commercial buildings expanded along Main Street and Grand Avenue. Already flourishing due to the railroad market hub, Oklahoma City's development was stimulated even further after the 1928 discovery of one of the state's largest oil fields below the city. The ensuing boom created most of the buildings within this block and dramatically changed the appearance of the entire central business district. That appearance, that central business district, all of those people that came to Oklahoma City, those are the factors that weigh on the other side of economic development. Those factors weigh on the historical preservation side. And in getting that balance right, I would argue that the committee, did not have all of the information available from them. They may have followed the guidelines at that time to the best of their ability, but that the guidelines mandate that balance done in such a methodical way that it's given great consideration to that other side. I feel too much consideration in this has been given, at least at this point, to the economic viability of either the building or the whole development, and not enough consideration to the other side of the scale, which is the historical preservation of the unique aspects of Oklahoma City.
We've got a couple of other board members, I think, that would like to speak to you, and then we'll excuse you after they've had their comments and invite Mr. Box back. Board members, if you...
I had a question of Mr. Box whenever he comes.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I was trying to follow up one of your arguments earlier, and when you were talking about the municipal code guidelines at section 59-7200G,
yes,
specifically G1 and G1A,
yes,
the use of the words should be versus shall. Can you explain that in a little more detail to me?
Yes. The use of the word shall in the guidelines, the use of the word should instead of shall in the guidelines means it isn't an absolute. The DDRC, and now you, the Board of Adjustment, has to look at the equities. What is the application, and what are we being asked to do? And because it should, it means it can't be every building that has to be saved. It means, does this building deserve to be saved based on what it means and based on what we're presented with? And I would submit that what we're presented with would warrant demolition.
So let me ask another follow-up question to that, because I had that highlighted as well. You're saying you don't even get to the ability for them to, they're charged with reviewing this core area of Oklahoma City. That's the Design Review Board's deal, is to review the core part of Oklahoma City and determine what decisions need to be made. And this falls under one of those decisions. So you're saying that because not every building is deemed, under your interpretation of the should clause there, not every building is deemed to be historic, we don't even get to the second part of the opposition's argument that we could get a non-binding report because we've deemed that this isn't even historic enough to get there, right? Am I reading that correctly?
Oh, correctly. Here, the point is that if the DDRC felt rushed, they could have deferred it. They could have sent it to another body. But they didn't. They felt like, based on the guidelines and based on what they're charged with, they had enough information before them to render a decision. And if anyone follows or has ever practiced before the DDRC, it's routine that they'll tell people, if they need more information, we need more information, come back. And they didn't do that here. They felt like they had enough information. And I believe one of the reasons why, and we addressed it there, is when we look at the historic aspect, it's a test that has to be done. And it's a two-part test. And the first part is you have to ask, did something historically significant or did something significant happen at this site? And the unfortunate reality is nothing historic happened here. To the contrary, this site, as Mr. Tannenbaum alluded to, was a disaster. The history of this site is a history riddled with crime. The history of this site is a history of scary, scary things happening. Our firm conducted a survey of every single building on this block, and there's a dozen binders. Every single time any of the addresses was referenced in a newspaper article, in an advertisement, in a phone book. We tried to assemble every single thing that could have ever happened in any of these buildings. And what we found at the bus station, and I'm just going to read a few of them. Beginning in 1948, just 7 years after it opened, significant crime. Almost every year started happening. And all of these are coming from various newspaper articles or other sources. In May of '63, a woman was shot at the bus station. In 1970, 2 parents left a dead baby in the locker room of the bus station. In 1972, or in the year of 1972 and the years following, it averaged 3 or 4 deaths per year. And I could go on. And as recently as July of 13, just months before it closed down, an elderly woman was raped in the basement. It's unfortunate. It's not pleasant to talk about. That is the history of this site. And it's my belief that's part of why the HP Commission the DDRC didn't deem it necessary to send it to the HP. But even if they had deemed that what had happened there was historically significant, there's another part of the test. That is, does it have much of the original integrity and fabric of the buildings? And we went systematically through. And the modifications made to the building render those buildings no longer architecturally significant and likely not eligible to even be listed. So there was no reason to send it back.
I guess the only other question I have, just for purposes of the record that came up on appeal, I watched the video and I read the transcript. Those in opposition to demolition, I didn't see one traffic study, an engineering study, or any viability study that was presented at that hearing.
That's correct, and none has been submitted.
Any other questions for Mr. Box, Mr. Lawler, Dr. Shadid? Mr. Lawler? Certainly.
I just wanted to point out that, there was a lot of communication in the media about this issue. One of the articles in the Oklahoman, for example, touched on exactly what Counselor just stated, which is there's been a lot of crime or this and that and a lot of negative look at. But I would point out that the same article that says a lot of those facts where I read them does take into consideration both sides of the coin. They also point out that, for example, the old Union Bus Station in Atlanta was in pretty much the same scenario. The article quotes people in Atlanta as saying it was in worse, more dilapidated shape than in Oklahoma City. It was built in 1938 in the Art Deco vibe, similar to the Union Bus Station, and that building has now been redeveloped in Atlanta into the Gray Restaurant because it was the old Gray Bustown Station, and it's an upscale dining restaurant. And I think that's a good example of how that balance can be better found when more time is taken, more care is taken. I do understand the arguments in the guidelines about them being they shall be applied, and then you should preserve as much as you can. Well, here I would simply argue that the guidelines, if followed to a T, do consider saving and preserving historical properties to the best of their ability, and more time is needed in order to determine in this case if that is being done or if that's possible.
And what I heard as I reviewed that hearing is that the developer and the architect did take into consideration, not only when it came to the bus station, but for the other buildings affected, they are incorporating, portions of those buildings designed to honor and remember. This is not just a clean sweep where you demo everything and there are no elements of any of these buildings being preserved or incorporated into the new structure. I don't think DDRC was blind to this at all. And, whatever crime or mischief may have occurred around this structure, to me, is not relevant to our discussion today.
And if I could address the one point about the Savannah bus station. What we did was we went and looked at it to see how that was able to happen. Two huge differences. One, the location of the Greyhound station in Savannah was on the outskirts of the core. It wasn't in the core of downtown like we have. The purchase price in Savannah was $500,000. The purchase price here was $2 million. So it's significantly economically unfeasible for this site, and the reason why is location and price compared to the Savannah station. So it's not apples to apples.
Mr. Chairman, I have a few comments that I want to make. I will not be able to support this application, which I'm sure will not come as any big surprise to anybody. Having been involved for years and years with the proposals and various proposals that arose and fell by the wayside for the redevelopment of the Skirvin Hotel, I have become very accustomed to the arguments that developers make about economic viability and so on. And although that's their job, so it certainly makes perfect sense that those are the arguments they make, they simply can't be the only, or in my personal opinion, the most significant part of that equation. I think that the bus station is a significant structure. I don't think preserving its sign and some tiles is going to honor it in the way that it needs to be honored. I think it needs to be preserved. And yes, it is often very, very difficult to put together the package that will make a piece of property economically viable for preservation. But there has to be a way to do it. And just as I was opposed to demolition of the Stage Center, I am opposed to demolition of the bus station. So I will not be able to support this application.
These decisions are difficult. There is a balancing act. I think DDRC had the power to do what they could do, and the standard wasn't met for them to continue or modify it. I commend both sides today on a very well presented and lively discussion on this topic. I cannot move for removal of the DDRC, and I would move that we sustain the decision to continue with the demolition for the reasons set forth in the record.
I appreciate your points, Janice, and I'm 33 years old, so there have been only a handful of times that I've seen historic buildings be demolished, and all of them are big topics of conversation. And I think there's a hesitancy on the part, certainly of me, and I think most people, I don't want to speak for you guys, but there's a humility in deciding that it is appropriate to demolish a structure, particularly when you weren't there, when, the arguments of, well, there's been crime. Well, there's probably also been a lot of people who have shown up to that bus station to, start their life here and make a city here. And I respect that and I appreciate that. I wasn't there, but I'm sure that it happened. At the same time, really the DDRC discussion, in my opinion, is not irrelevant, but it's, as it relates to upholding their decision, our job is to review it de novo. And one thing that has been missed here is that the whole intention is to balance these equities. There has been no evidence presented that I've heard outside of the architectural significance that was discussed that something significant here happened here that merited its preservation. In addition to that, there hasn't been anything offered to us to indicate that there is some viable use. And I wasn't here, and all I did was read the news and the transcripts like everybody else, but that was a big problem with the Stage Center as well. And whether or not we had enough time or there's been enough discourse and things like that, the process is what it is. It's our job to balance those equities and that information and make a decision, right? And I feel like the economic weight here is great. If someone was before this board, and I have a feeling had been before DDRC, and offered up that they demolish the bus station for a fast food restaurant or something, I'm sure that wouldn't have made it very far. The reality is the economic weight is tremendous here. And the growth, in my view, of the city and the appropriateness of what is going on is a big part of what we should be looking at. We've talked a lot about the history, but we haven't talked a lot about the economic viability and the economic importance of this project. And I think it's very important. And for that reason, I second your motion.
For clarity, we have a motion and a second that this board sustain the decision of DDRC in their case number DTCA-14-00110 for the reason that the evidence supports the decision of the DDRC. Let's register your vote. You are approved. No further business before this board. I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
I'd make a motion to adjourn, please.
Second.
The motion and a second. Register your vote. We are adjourned.